For a long stretch of time, the casket match felt like one of the most recognizable dark attractions in world wrestling entertainment. It was simple, eerie, and instantly marketable. Put your opponent inside a casket, close the lid, and the match is over. That was the entire idea. It did not need much explanation because the image itself did the work. A coffin at ringside changed the tone immediately. It told the audience that this was not just another grudge match. This was something colder, stranger, and more theatrical. That is a big part of why the stipulation rose in the first place. The casket match fit perfectly into the world of The Undertaker, whose character was built around death imagery, funerary symbolism, and a supernatural presence that made ordinary wrestling rules feel too small for him. The company's own history of the stipulation traces it back to The Undertaker's early years, when his presentation was already steeped in body bags, urns, and a macabre sense of punishment. Once the casket became part of that formula, the match almost sold itself. And unlike some of the company's more complicated specialty bouts, the casket match was easy for anyone to understand. There were no temporary champions, no staggered entries, no layered scoring systems. The objective was visual and final. That made it ideal for major feuds, especially ones involving The Undertaker, because it turned the finish into a piece of dark theater. Winning was not just about pinning someone's shoulders to the mat. It was about sealing them inside a box and shutting the door. For a while, that gave the stipulation real power. The company could bring it back for the right rivalry and immediately make the match feel important. It also helped that the casket match produced memorable images. A ladder match has the hanging prize. A steel cage has the enclosure. The casket match had the coffin itself, sitting in plain view the entire time like a warning. That visual identity made it easy to promote and easy to remember. But the same thing that made the match effective also limited its future. The casket match was always heavily tied to The Undertaker. That gave it identity, but it also kept it from becoming a truly universal gimmick. A stipulation can survive for decades if it fits many stars and many stories. The casket match did not naturally fit a wide range of characters. It worked best in a very specific atmosphere, with a very specific kind of feud, and usually with a very specific performer at the center of it. That dependence matters. When a match type becomes too closely associated with one legendary figure, it can remain memorable without remaining common. The casket match never disappeared entirely, but it became much rarer because it was difficult to separate from the world that made it famous. Without the right story, the right mood, and the right personalities, it risked feeling less sinister and more like a prop. There was also a broader shift in presentation over time. In 2008, World Wrestling Entertainment publicly announced its move to a PG television rating and described its programming as family-oriented. That did not mean the company abandoned every dark or violent idea, but it did mean some older gimmicks became less natural fits. The casket match was not as overtly dangerous as an Inferno match, but it was still built around death imagery, symbolic burial, and a deliberately grim tone. As the company became more controlled and more image-conscious, the match was naturally going to be used more selectively. And that is really where the fall of the casket match begins to make sense. It was not abandoned because it lacked value. It became rare because it was too specialized to be used constantly and too connected to one mythic character to evolve easily into a broader company staple. The company could still bring it back for the right occasion, but it was no longer the kind of stipulation that fit comfortably into regular rotation. That does not lessen its legacy. In fact, rarity may have helped preserve it. Because the company never turned the casket match into an overused routine, it kept much of its mystique. Fans still associate it with some of the darkest and most theatrical moments in company history. It still feels distinctive, it still feels ominous, and it still carries the aura of a match type that belonged to a stranger, more gothic version of World Wrestling Entertainment. In the end, that is the real story of the casket match. It rose because it was visually powerful, easy to understand, and perfectly matched to one of the company's most iconic characters. It became rare because that same identity made it hard to universalize. The casket match was never just a stipulation. It was a mood, a symbol, and a piece of character-driven spectacle. That is why it endured in memory, and that is why it faded from regular use.